Scum One, Scum All, and Scum As You Are. I'm Vulture Culture. This is the Chroma Polaris from 1984, and this is the Akai AX60 from 1986. And both of these vintage analog synthesizers are completely analog, and they have a reputation. They have a dirty reputation for sounding cold. So this interesting thing happened with even the Prophet Rev 3 when they swapped over to CEM chips, which stands for Curtis Electromusic Specialties chips, basically the components that make up a synthesizer. They developed a reputation for sounding a little bit colder than the SSM chips or other discrete analog components. And so I thought it would be fun to sort of shoot out these two synthesizers and come up with a sort of consensus about what it is that sets these two synths apart, because they have very similar internals inside that make up the sounds, and the sound to me is very similar out of the library of vintage synthesizers I have here. So I thought it would be a fun thing to do. So the way this stream is going to go is we're going to, first off, if you just want to start where we are comparing the sounds of the oscillators, I'll put a timestamp on the video down below. And what we're going to do is we'll start by comparing the oscillator section of both of these synthesizers. Then we'll talk about the filters and some of the differences there. We'll talk about the envelopes because there's differences there as well. We'll talk about the effects. So the AX60 has a built-in chorus and it has an arpeggiator, both of which the Chroma Polaris does not have, but it does have a sequencer. So that's a thing. And there's probably a couple of other things. We'll look at the differences in the LFO and modulation possibilities. You know, there's certain things you can do on the Polaris you can't on the AX60 and vice versa. But I wanted to just kind of hit all of those points and maybe get a little bit of talking out of the way. So I'm just going to cover this as quickly as I can. Right now on Reverb, as of today, so if you're not watching this video live, it's going to be different when you watch the video. But I was able to find an Akai AX60 for $1,125. That was the cheapest one on Reverb right now that was in good condition. And on Reverb, a Chroma Polaris, the cheapest one that was in good condition, which is important because if you buy a Polaris, you need to make sure the membrane panel is working or else you are fucked, was $2,625. So an exactly $1,500 difference between these two synthesizers as of the recording. Vintage synth prices go up and down, especially the Akai AX60. Sometimes you can get them even cheaper than that because it's a rare synth. Same thing with the Polaris. They're rare, so the prices aren't as rationalized as, say, something like a Juno 106 is. And they both have Curtis Electromusic Specialties chips in it, or CEM chips. So the Akai AX60, which was released in 1986, which makes it one of the last analog synths of the 80s. Everybody says analog synths in the 80s, but the truth is by 1983 and 1985, people had already swapped over to digital synths. And so a lot of the songs of the 80s, when you hear that nostalgic 80s sound, it's actually the sound of digital synthesizers, not analog synths a lot of the time. And the AX60 was right there at the end with Roland's JX10. That was the last synth they put out, and that was in 1986 as well. And so the Polaris was out a couple years earlier, but very similar internals. So the AX60 actually has a VCO, VCF, and VCA, which is the oscillator, filter, and amplifier on a single chip, the CEM3374. And that's because they actually had to get to where they could do that with a chip in 86. Remember, back then, the technology was evolving rapidly. Like every 6 months, there was some new innovation. The Chroma Polaris, on the other hand, has the 3374, if I'm correct. That's the filter and the mix. And then the oscillators are 3372s, if I'm correct. Dual oscillators. So the big difference between these two synths in terms of the biggest thing that you're going to notice between them and why the Chroma Polaris costs so much more would be that this has 2 oscillators per voice and this has a single oscillator per voice. And for some people, that's probably the end of the discussion, right? They're like, well, I like having 2 voltage-controlled oscillators. They're both voltage-controlled, by the way. There's no digitally controlled oscillators here. and voltage-controlled oscillators usually sell for a premium on the vintage market. But for some people, they're going to be like, hey, I want 2 oscillators per voice. The Chroma Polaris is the only way to go. However, there's a trick up the sleeve of the AX60, which is that every oscillator can be pulse width modified. So normally with analog synths, you can only pulse width modify the square wave. And all that means is changing the duty cycle of the square wave, making it thinner or fatter. And by changing that over time, you introduce even harmonics, which sort of gives it a more detuned, rich sound. And so that's the interesting thing, is that you can actually sort of create almost that detuned sort of sound with the AX60, where you don't need that extra oscillator. And that's sort of the trick of this synth. And like I said, both of these synths have a reputation for being cold, but especially the AX60. And I'm hoping to convince some people that this is actually a very underrated synthesizer. Chroma Polaris, it's hard to argue that it's underrated because it has this like legendary status about it. But the AX60, to me, can cover a lot of the same ground. So that is sort of my spiel, I think, about this in the beginning. So I'm going to just pull up a initialized patch that I made on both of these. So we should just be hearing a sawtooth here. And let me just make sure the volume's up. Before the stream, I actually made sure that these were perfectly volume matched. The moment we introduce another oscillator up here, I'm going to have to start playing with volume and stuff like that. So very exciting to be doing this and checking this out. Noise Theorem says, with any vintage synth, signal chain matters, add the right effect, and just about any of them will be awesome. I agree with that. When it comes to these synths, effects are important. So, and actually while we're on that topic, noise, there's going to be a couple of things I'm not going to talk about tonight, which is the sequencer of the Chroma Polaris and the arpeggiator, because to me, that's sort of like apples and oranges, where it's like, technically, I guess you could probably do more with the sequencer. But for me, I personally really like an arpeggiator because I like to just play chords, right? But both of those things don't really, in a modern context, they don't matter as much because MIDI exists. And, MIDI exists on both of these synths. Both of them have MIDI, but I'm just saying, it's not the end of the world. Another thing is the Akai AX60 has a built-in analog chorus that the Chroma Polaris does not have. So that immediately gives it an advantage, because no matter what, when I play a chord, if I put that chorus on, it's going to sound so huge compared to, right? It's just not going to have the same. I'm going to bring these down just a little bit while we're listening just to the raw tones. Just especially if you're listening to this video in stereo with headphones or with good studio monitors or something, the width of the chorus, it's just unfair to compare it to the Polaris. So we're not going to use the chorus during this stream. We're just going to talk about the raw tone of the synthesizer, because I assume most of you can apply a chorus plug-in or pedal or something to a synthesizer and, balance that out. But it is a feature of the AX60, which I think is important, I think it's an important difference there that the AX60 has a really great analog chorus. You guys know that, for instance, the Akai SX240, which is just barely off camera, you can see it on the right there, on the far left side of the screen right here. I don't like the chorus on this synthesizer. There are synths I do not like the chorus of, but the Akai AX60 is not one of them. It's a really great chorus, actually. So with all of that being said, thank you guys for listening to me real quick. Let's go ahead and start to compare just the sound of the sawtooth oscillators, and then we will get more complicated. So I'll play some stuff and then talk about what you're hearing. This is interesting. You might notice that the oscillators are sounding very similar right here in the middle. I mean, that's pretty crazy, right? That if this was a Behringer clone of the Polaris and we were just hearing these oscillators, I'd be like, it's the same thing. But as we move up, listen to that top end. Let's go back to the bottom. Hearing some interesting noise in there. Again, here, listen to the top end, okay? This is a moment where it would be good to have some good speakers you're listening through. So the interesting thing about these two synths is right here at middle C, they're almost identical. I mean, that's the same synth, right? Or the same oscillator. We don't have the wave shape up or anything because we're doing this live, but we could basically say by ear, to my ear, that sounds pretty much spot on. But as we go lower, you can hear crazy amount of high end that's coming through on the Polaris that's not coming through on the AX60. And at first, I actually thought this might be something to do with the filter just being more closed off at the low end. But adjusting the key follow and all of that actually only makes the problem worse. So if I adjust the key follow, it will actually darken the low end of the synth further. So we won't do that for now. So we just want to hear around the middle of the synth, it gets much more pretty close, but then as we approach the higher end of the keyboard, the opposite happens, where the top end of the Chroma Polaris starts to sort of dip down. Dubstation, I just want to say, Dubstation says, chorus is one thing where analog really matters in my opinion, and I agree. There is something to be said for the analog choruses of the 80s. That is magical. And I have a plugin I'm working on, Inktomi, that will be coming out soon, free for members of this channel. Good reason to become a member. But to try to really capture the intricacies of those bucket brigade delay analog chips and all of their warmth is very different than trying to create a digital chorus. And it's been a lot of fun going on the journey of actually trying to capture that. Going back to the synthesizers, you can hear that the Chroma Polaris just really loses that top end. That's on the AX60, it is like razor sharp. So immediately there's this interesting sort of conundrum about these synthesizers where right in the middle they sound identical, but the low end of the Chroma Polaris I much prefer. It just sounds muted down there. But then the opposite is true up top. So if I play an octave all the way up, that is so crystalline clear and sounds amazing. And then this starts to sound a little muted, right? It's crazy. I don't know. Are you guys hearing the same thing as me? Like, can you guys hear that, or am I just losing my fucking mind? I don't know. You guys talk to me about what's going on. So the big difference now, let's start with the AX60. I think that's a more fair place to start, which is that we can check out the different oscillator shapes. So the oscillators on the Chroma Polaris can only be sawtooth or pulse waves, square waves. On the Akai AX60, we have sawtooth. We also have square waves. And actually, why don't we, while we're here, why don't we just swap this over to a square wave and see what the differences are here. So I wonder if it'll be the same, where it's a little muted down low. There we go. Well, this is crazy. It sounds more muted on the Polaris now. Let's see. More high end is coming through, it seems, on the square wave. So on the Akai AX60, just wins flat out when it comes to square wave. Yeah, that's insane. I mean, they're very close though, right? They're actually further apart, I would say. This is the square wave. You can really hear the brightness that's not there as much on the Chroma Polaris. And so that's the interesting thing about the Polaris, is that it has a much more mid-rangey sound, I've always said, which really lends itself to a mix, by the way. It's wonderful when you have a synth that has plenty of low end and plenty of high end when you're just playing with it. But when it comes to actually putting it in the mix, sometimes those frequencies are just too much to fit in, and you have to do a whole lot of EQ to make it work. I've noticed with the Polaris, it just sounds good. You know, maybe a little bit of a boost to like 10K or something, just to like give it a little bit more of a modern sheen. Anyways, that's the sort of the end of the story when it comes to the oscillator section of the Chroma Polaris, because it's got saw and square, and that's it. We've got a few tricks. We've got ring mod and sync, which is some stuff that we don't have on the AX60. But for now, when we're just talking about raw oscillator tone, which is what us synth nerds like to drool over. Can I get some scum snob in the chat, please, by the way? We have a couple of things that we can do. I'm pressing the wrong fucking thing over here. That we don't have on the Polaris. Notably, we have triangle waves, so... Ooh, that's some low end. I saw Mighty Pinto, I was watching his stream playing the Adventure of Link Zelda 2 for the NES, and whenever I hear a triangle wave, I always just think about the Legend of Zelda, and just, you know, that era. I don't remember the notes off the top of my head for how to play the songs from that game, but it was all these really warbly triangle waves. And I've always thought this is an interesting point for video game people to get into synths, because actually all of those retro consoles were essentially vintage synthesizers in some way, where they were making sounds based off of the same stuff that we have in synths, where we have, you know, oscillators, and they could modify the pitch some way. We've got more options because we have filters and things like that when it comes to synthesizers, but you can get a lot of those retro video game tones directly from analog synths, because that's essentially what a Game Boy and a NES was, which is super interesting anyways to me. So Dubstation says, I think having a triangular sign is especially important for overall versatility, especially when using for bass. Talk to Texas murdering me right now. I agree, because there's certain things you can get. There's a way that you can get close to a triangle wave by using a square wave and a cutoff filter, but you lose some stuff. Here's a feature that I think is a standout feature on the Akai AX60, which is that you can actually have a sawtooth wave and a triangle wave at the same time. It's easiest to hear if I play the sawtooth on its own, right? Or with the triangle wave stacked in, versus just how much thicker that sounds. So immediately we've got this interesting thing where that is like the fattest saw of all time, and is super cool. And this is all stuff the Chroma Polaris can't do. And the Chroma Polaris costs more than twice as much. It costs $1,500 more, and this synthesizer just costs $1,125 right now on Reverb. Of course, the prices will be different if you're watching this in the future. So immediately, I'm impressed by the Akai AX60 to really open up the sound sculpting possibilities when we're just talking about the oscillator section, which is right here. We have noise on both of them. Interestingly, noise is a source on the Akai AX60 that can be blended in. Oof, that's harsh. On the Chroma Polaris, it's there, but we have no control over it. It's either on or off. So if I play, that's it. We've got no way to mix that in. So that's another way in which I think the oscillator section of the Akai AX60 is superior, because that's a very nice thing. I love being able to mix in noise. I don't want like a full buttload of noise all the time, because to me, that's just a lot of fucking noise to deal with, and I wished it had been dialed back a little bit. Mind Idiot, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Mind Idiot says, I'm kicking myself in the balls for missing out on an AX60 for 1,000 Canadian. That is actually a very good price, because what's the Canadian exchange rate? That would be great. Mind Idiot says, I can't listen right now because I'm on a Trans-Pacific flight, baby. Well, enjoy your flight. It's good to see you. Sorry you can't catch it up, but it's awesome to see you. So, one thing you're noticing too is how much darker that noise on the Polaris is. So it's more of like a pink noise, whereas on the Akai AX60, it's more of a white noise. For whatever that's worth. Let's get at what's really cool about the Akai AX60, which is the fact that you can do pulse width modulation, which of course you could do on most analog synthesizers, but we can do pulse width. So we can control the pulse width. Let's just do that real quick. So, and on my little video game rant, this is how the Game Boy worked. It had square waves, and then you could just have narrower versions of that. So a full fat square wave sounds like this. Halfway, that's like 3/4 of the way. We can't go all the way through 0, but we can go pretty close. On that note, it is through 0. So, you know, little analog differences in calibration. This synthesizer's been serviced since it was on the stream last, which is super cool. Severed Machines down in South Florida, worth checking out if you can get a synthesizer to him. Great guy. Anyways, that's not all that crazy. What's awesome is that we can do pulse width modulation. And so you can hear immediately that what's happening is that the size of the pulse width is being modulated. It's being changed to go from 50-50, so 50% up and 50% down, to a narrower amount, which gives you that thinner sound, and that adds this really wonderful sound that is almost like having a detuned oscillator, because it has this like beating to it. So we can do the same thing over here. We can add some pulse width modulation. So turn that fucking noise off. And then we can run the LFO, which is called sweep, over here. Let me see what we've got to do that. Let's see, is it this? You'll notice that we can go through 0 here and actually have where the wave cancels out entirely on the Polaris. So let's see if we can match these two. A little bit faster rate. So right now we're still just keeping it kind of loose. We're just kind of trying to compare the two. Obviously I've got headphones on. Irish Musico, welcome to the stream. How's it going, my friend? How's it going? What's new? It's been a little bit. So just, you know, without really fucking around too much with the synthesizer, we've got a similar sound. This one is super clear. The square wave sounds incredible. I would say on the Polaris, it's less inspiring. But then again, it's kind of got that low-mid fatness, you know. Daddy has a sickness for the thickness sometimes. So, yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing where you immediately sort of notice some differences there. One thing to me is that the speed of this pulse width modulation is very slow on the AX60, or very low, and it's still pretty fast. We can get pretty slow. If I take the rate all the way down, we can get in that same territory, so. But we just have less of that top end on the Polaris, which for me is a bit of a bummer. But anyways, what's interesting is both of these synths can actually do pulse width modulation on the sawtooth, although my understanding of that with the sawtooths in the Polaris is that it's something like the difference between a square and a saw or something like that. I don't know. Go watch Alex Ball's video. It's a little confusing. Let's focus on the AX60 for a bit, where we can check out the pulse width modulation on different sources. So let's check it out. I'm using about 75% on the pulse width VCO here, and then about 25% speed on the sawtooth wave. Kind of clipping through zero there, so. I guess I wasn't. So this is the interesting thing, is it sort of like fades in another oscillator is almost how it sounds. I know that's not what it's doing literally, but can you hear that? It's almost like having a bit of a high pass filter going on another oscillator. So. Actually get better results with the VCO all the way up. It's a little thicker. Let's go ahead and move the sawtooth over to pulse width over here and try the same thing. So. So this is interesting. I prefer the tone of the AX60. It's much brighter and more clear, letting more through. But the pulse width itself is a little annoying in that it has this like really sort of like you're sucking air in and out of your mouth type sound to it. Versus we're getting much more of like a chorusy type pulse width modulation sound out of the Chroma Polaris, which sounds really gorgeous. I mean, just, you know. I mean, holy fucking balls, right? That's one oscillator, right? Versus over here. You can hear how it like cancels out for a second there, which is a bit of a bummer for me. So Interestingly, right now, the Chroma Polaris, just the way that that pulse width modulation on the saw works, sort of makes up for the fact that the square wave doesn't come through as clear in the top end. So, I mean, it's interesting. What do you guys think? Right now, if you had to pick one of the two, which one are you going? Just off of that. I'd be curious to see what you guys think at this point of the stream. We'll ask the question a couple of times as we go. What's really fun, though, is, of course, pulse width modulation on more sources. So we could do it to the triangle wave as well. So we could try. And you'll hear that it has the same sort of interesting pulse width modulation. I wish there was some way that I could control the depth of that, but I don't think I can. Like, it's going through 0, and I'd love for it to not. Because for that moment, it just disappears, and all you have is the low end. So it's a bit of a shame. So it's kind of the same thing as the sawtooth. Irish Musico says he just finished a gig. I love that. But it does sound really good. We've already checked out the square wave, but let's go ahead and check it out on the triangle and sawtooth here. This is better, I think. Nope, it's still going through 0, but for whatever reason you don't notice it as much. Maybe it's because, this is my guess, the way it sounds is you've almost got a second square wave oscillator or pulse oscillator that's being pulse width modified, and you hear it kind of come in and out against the other oscillator. So on triangle plus saw, you have the advantage of 2 oscillators without that pulse width mod, and so it's a little less extreme, and I think I prefer it mostly on this, and I noticed this the first time I did a stream on this, that we've got a pretty good sound right up here. We've been doing all of this without release, but why don't we add a little bit of release? So I'm just going to go to the VCA and add about 50% release, and I can do the same thing over here and see how close we are. There's a much longer release here. Let's go ahead and add. Yeah, so let's check the pulse width down here and how this sounds. But it just sounds fucking good. That's the pulse width on the saw. Let's go back over to the square wave and just one more time do a comparison there on the square waves. If I put it in the middle, let's see if we can get something where it doesn't go through 0. Polaris sounds better, Aquatic Borealis says, yeah. Devastation says, sounds like I'm leaning to the Polaris, but not worth double, but the answer is always both. Devastation Zero says, the other thing is to consider is phase cancellation. When using 2 waves from the same oscillator, there won't be any, but with 2 oscillators, you get it, especially with bass. Yeah, so that's another very wise point, which is to say that if you made a bass sound on the Akai AX60, you're not ever going to have any phase cancellation issues. So that's a way in which down here, you can get that, well, we actually have to kill the release, otherwise you could get some phase cancellation. Right? But on this synth, especially once we involve the second oscillator. So right now, we're going to have to turn this synth down, but what we can do is pull in that other oscillator. The only way to turn off an oscillator on the Chroma Polaris, there's no mix amount, which is a shame. You actually have to just push the pulse width through 100 to turn it off. So this whole time on the Polaris, we've been listening to one oscillator. So just imagine how thick that pulse width could sound. I'm going to turn this down slightly. Now we have 2 oscillators per voice. That's starting to sound a little bit wimpy, right? Not bad. It's actually pretty beefy. So much of it is I'm trying to get the volumes right, but we're doing this live. Fuck it, we're doing it live. So, you know, it's sometimes, it's funny, like if you turn the volume up on the Polaris, it sounds bigger. But if you turn the volume up over here, it sounds pretty amazing. GM Tech M. Brad, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Yes, the Polaris does sound fucking powerful, no doubt. But the Akai AX60 sounds fucking clear, at least on square waves. When we move it over to the sawtooth, we do lose a little bit at the low end. So let's go ahead and move over to the sawtooth on both synths. And getting the volumes right, so I'm going to kill a little volume here. Because this is sounding monstrous now. So you really get the low end drop off on the Polaris on the sawtooth waves. I just don't love the sound of the sawtooth wave pulse width modulation as much because of that weird cancellation. Brad says, I'm good. Hope you are too. I am doing wonderfully. Thank you very much for asking. Dubstation says, wow, the mix section of the Polaris is really lackluster, especially with noise. Big turnoff for me. I agree. I think there's a strong argument for the Prophet 600 as being probably the best value while still being legendary analog 2 VCO per voice synthesizer. The Chroma Polaris doesn't have really anything going on in the mix section, which is pretty brutal. The noise is either on or off, and there's no way to mix the amount of the oscillators. Now, on the Akai AX60, we only have one oscillator, so that's a thing. I haven't mentioned this yet. Akai has a proprietary brand. You guys probably know Akai from like the MPC series and their samplers. Well, there's actually a sampler in option here. So we could swap from noise to both, or we can turn noise off and actually run one of the vintage Akai samplers into this and use it as a second, they say second VCO. It's basically as a second oscillator. And by doing that, we can actually turn this into a 2 sound source synth. Only one of them will be an analog oscillator, but you can do all sorts of cool D50 and Sonic SQ80 stuff with the Akai AX60. 2 reasons that's not happening in the stream. The most obvious one is I don't have one of those samplers lying around, but I would consider getting one. But the more, even if I had it, I think I'd want to just shoot these out as they are, you know, because that's how I do. But yeah, it's just so you've actually got more flexibility in this one slider than you do on the Chroma Polaris as far as the oscillators go. So that's a thing. You know, we're sort of at an interesting point. If I move this over to saw and triangle, I'm interested to hear the differences. So So, to me, I don't know what you guys are hearing. Cheap Panda? Why do I keep saying Cheap Panda? Panda, what's up? Channel 1 Panda. What I'm hearing here is the Akai AX60, the low end, especially when you kick that triangle wave in, gets massive. Just massive. And you've got the high end. Whereas on the Chroma Polaris, it's more mid-rangey, which again, as I said earlier in the stream, is sort of its secret weapon, and part of why it sounds so good is because it just fits in. What's up, Sebastian Comore? How's it going, my friend? What's up, Seb? Pliskin, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Akai should get back into the synth game. The Timberwolf was embarrassing. Yeah, that's for sure. There's definitely a lot of cool synths they put out before then, the AX80 being another one. Really awesome. So yeah, I'd say that this one's got a lot of clarity in low end. For having very, very similar components, it's crazy how much this one sounds like really monstrous and dirty, but kind of focused in that mid-range, whereas this has like a very scooped, beautiful, modern, like super clear high end and super clear low end, no mud, like just really sounds great. And if you guys were here earlier in the stream, you'll see that like if we just decide, okay, so let's kill that, kill the pulse width mod, and same thing over here, let's kill that and go back just to the sawtooth on both synthesizers, we should be able to get to these sounding just about, oh, let me kill that and kill the pulse width mod. What am I doing wrong here? Very similar sound between the two. It's hard to get them just perfect as far as it goes. Let's see. Aquatic says, but the Akai sounded a bit muddy in that low end, didn't it? Well, it's got something going on in the low end. I agree with that. That triangle, though, just that triangle fucks. Jamie says, let's compare the filters, and I couldn't agree more. So I'm going to just try to get these two kind of matched up again. Just reset both of these guys. And make sure the volume's up. So you can hear that both of these synths oscillators are almost identical, which makes sense because they both have the same parts. Let's see how similar the filters are. So both of these synths have the annoying fucking thing where the filter cutoff is digitally controlled. So it's an analog filter, but the control of the values of the slider is digital, so you can hear stepping. Interestingly, I can't go below this frequency. Even if I turn everything down, we go back over here, turn this depth level and sustain all the way down. Oh, there we go. So you can hear that the resonance is like insane at 50%, right? Let's try that out over on the Polaris. Let's do that a little slower. See how close we can get that. I was going too slow because, again, the sliders have this weird update thing where they don't go if you don't go fast enough. So we almost need a little bit of envelope depth. All the way up there. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. Let's increase the resonance to, let's say, 25% on both of these guys and see how they sound. So back to the Polaris. Wow, this is so weird. So immediately, it definitely has a very similar character. We can hear that. Let's go to 50%, and I think this is where it's going to get a little foggy. So, I mean, like, that's the crazy thing about the AX60 is that resonance gets in your face. We're at 50% on the Chroma Polaris at 50%. This is like a really nice throaty sort of thing. I'm going to bring the volume down on both of these synths and just go 100% resonance so we can make that decision. Interestingly, it's not that much different than 50%. But all the way up. I mean, fucking very similar. I would venture to say that, you know, it's almost identical filter. So the oscillators at least start off almost identical, and the filter can be almost identical, which is super interesting. Walter, welcome to the stream. How's it going? The Akai MPC keys seems like the ultimate top board for live use, but needs some refinements. Yeah, I agree with that. Aquatic says, I think it was just because you were playing the lows and highs. The lows are kind of drowning out the low. Yeah. Siren Cosplay, welcome to the stream. Alien abduction vibes. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of talking filter stuff going on here. Jamie says, so close with the resonance all the way up, but the Polaris sounds a bit more steppy. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a great way to say it, Seb. The Chroma is warmer, fatter. The Akai is more clear and bright. And that's going to be a theme we hear throughout the whole thing. And I've got a little bit of decay or something going on here. I guess it's just that analog gate opening and closing, whereas over here, we don't have anything. We don't hear anything. Not really a pro or a con. I don't really care about that. Let's bring the resonance back to a reasonable amount and try to control it with the actual ADSR. So let's put the attack and decay all the way up on the filter and see what it sounds like. Anything? Wow, that's slow. Wow, it's like on or off. So let's bring that down a little bit. Regal, welcome to the stream. AX60 or Poly 6? That's interesting. That's a tough question. On the AX60 stream, I said AX60 because it has a lot of stuff the Poly 6 can't do. Maybe I would take that back nowadays. They're both great. They're both awesome. Like, they're both really great synthesizers that you can still get at a reasonable-ish price. I think this synth sounds really good. And the Poly 6 is just like immediate warm analog fat glory. These synths are both much colder than the Poly 6. Poly 6 is warm all day long, almost to the point of being like kind of you know, there's no real edge to it, not really, you know. So that would be where I would say my quick answer on that one. Definitely like a bird chirping sort of a sound. Let's go ahead and try to match that sound over here on the Polaris. So we'll add some attack and decay and everything to the envelope here and see what happens. And make sure the envelope depth is all the way up. Interesting, the decay drops more drastically. Couple of things to notice about the Akai AX60. It's got a very ice picky resonance point where it's like you really hear that resonance peak, whereas the Chroma Polaris sounds a little more saturated, so those harmonics are broken up a little bit more. Another thing is there's an interesting thing happening to the sort of distortion you can hear of the oscillator as the resonance is moving, where you can hear the background oscillator sort of reacting to that sound. It's almost like a pulsing. Can you guys hear that? On the Chroma Polaris. Come on back down. Oh, it must be the sustained decay here, so. That's what it was. So, really, if we're talking about the filter, the oscillator section for me is good on both. But there's sort of like pros and cons. Overall, I prefer the raw tone of the oscillators on the Polaris. But as Dubstation pointed out, this is much more flexible, and the lack of being able to mix the noise in and out, and that there's no way to mix like a balance between oscillator 1 and 2, that sucks. Massive asshole. Like, I'm not into that. But it does just sound really great. Filter sound on its own, the filter on the Polaris beats it out, I think. It's a little bit growlier, talkier. It's a bit of a preference thing, but to me, this just has that immediate sort of Curtis Electromusic Specialties chip sound. Jamie says, sounds nasty on the Polaris. I agree. Char Lemons, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Yeah, they both are amazing synths. Doing the same thing over here. I just don't get as much growl. Let's try just a little bit more. See if we can get a little bit more out of it. That was fucking painful. So yeah, the resonance on the AX60 is just more extreme and more ice picky, where it's just not as pleasant. Whereas, you know, you take the Polaris to the extreme as well, and it can sound not great. But there's just a lot more sweet spot on the Polaris. So that would be what I would say. Jim says, at the end of the day, sound is everything. And that is true. It doesn't matter features if you don't like the raw sound of a synthesizer. Siren says, I would insult a sweet little piano song on either of these. Nice alien abduction found on a new planet vibes, for sure. Definitely some Kraftwerk in there. The slow attack makes it sound great. I agree, Jim. Aquatic says, the Akai sounded harsh in the high end there. Yeah, that's the thing. It's got that ice pick in your fucking eye sort of sound. Couple more things I want to talk about. I want to check out, let's see here. Okay, so let's do this. Let's turn off everything on the Polaris here. And we're hearing nothing, right? So I'm going to turn off the envelope depth. I'm going to turn the resonance all the way up, cutoff all the way down, and keyboard tracking all the way up. And let's see what we get. Turn this all the way down. So what you're hearing right now, if this isn't obvious, you're actually hearing the sound of just the filter. Because if I turn the resonance off, you can hear there's no oscillator or noise going through. So we have a fully resonant filter on the Polaris. And one of the beautiful things about the Polaris is really good. We can turn the volume down here. I think that might be... Yeah, we were getting a little bit of distortion from the volume. Just beautiful, absolutely gorgeous sound of playing the filter. So again, it's like Polaris is not as flexible as a lot of other synths from this era by a long shot, but what it can do really well. Let's see if the Akai AX60 can do something similar. So I'm going to turn the envelope depth of the envelope generator off. We'll turn the resonance all the way up, cutoff all the way down, key follow all the way up, and we can turn the noise off and bring the balance all the way down. So first, let's just confirm that we have no sound source going through. That's correct. We have nothing going on. I can't hear anything. Let's increase the resonance and bring the cutoff down and see. Okay, we can hear something. And let's add some release to the Is that key tracking all the way? It seems like it's slightly out of tune, doesn't it? Jim says, farting around on YouTube is one thing, but playing with a band is a whole new can of worms. I agree with that. Seb says, Aphex Twin right there, for sure. Char Lemons, thank you very much. I've put a lot of work into trying to make this setup look not terrible. Siren says, it sounds like Fantasy World. Yeah. So what I'm noticing here is because of the... Let's try hitting the auto-tune button, just seeing if it'll take a second to auto-tune. Both of these synths have auto-tune on them for what they care about, if anybody really cares. But let's just see if that fixes the tuning issue. Oh, they're slightly out. I feel like the key follow isn't perfect. Pretty good at middle C here. Out of tune here. And out of tune there. So, interestingly, we continue on a journey of discovery together that the AX60's key tracking is not as awesome as the Chroma Polaris is, because the Polaris, you truly can, it's like so fucking great. You just put the key tracking at 100% and it just works. And it's like, oh, it's just beautiful. And we can get close. No, we can't. It's just not grabbing those frequencies in such a way as to allow us to get, you know, a really perfect set. I don't know, maybe if the key follows a little less. Let's try to... and see. It's just, they're not... it just will not stay in perfect tune. Now, will most people, most of the time, use the filter resonance on a synthesizer to make a sound like this? No, not at all. It's just not a thing that's probably going to happen for most people. And especially because this synthesizer does have triangle waves. So if we just go away from this, open the filter up all the way, and turn a wave on, and we put the, let's go like, and put the triangle on, you know, we can... we can get something pretty close. The difference on the Polaris is a little bit more filtered. Increase the release a little. So just by using the triangle wave of the AX60, we can get very close to what the Polaris is doing by using the resonant filter. And so there's a way in which, you know, we're getting there by different paths. With this one, we're using an oscillator. With this one, we're only using the filter and resonance. With this one, we're using no resonance, but we can sort of get pretty close. Another thing is we could add noise in, and now we have that on the Polaris, which gives it this kind of wonderful dreamy tone. If I do the same thing, what is it? Right? But we have control over it. Yeah, so we're definitely in the same ballpark as far as trying to create a sound. And honestly, if I wanted to make that sound, the fact that you have a balance slider on the AX60, I think is a very awesome thing and might be good enough to not need to have a resonant filter that key tracks perfectly. So yeah, definitely a thing. Yeah, so let's see what else is going on. Pliskin says, have you compared 6-voice stacked Unison? No, but I could. Channel 1 Panda says, Polaris wins in my book. Yes, Quadic says, you do want accurate key tracking though, and love that fuzzy dreamy tone. Yeah, it's gorgeous. So real quick, let's go away from filter land and just turn the resonance off and see where we're at here with some, maybe with some sawtooth waves. And turn it on over here. Let's go ahead and kick Unison on for the lower and upper, and then let's see, where was Unison? I think it's this button here. That doesn't look like it. No, I don't want that at all. So let's just pull that preset up again. Oh, I've now created a so let's just turn that off. I don't want to do that. Oh, here we go. Lower function no link should do it. Wow. That's harsh. And let's go. No, I still have 2 layers on. So another thing about these synthesizers is they have bitembrality to them. So both of them can stack both of their voices. With the Polaris, you can do it with dynamic splitting. So as you mess around, it'll automatically divide up the voices. With the AX60, you actually have a bunch of different options. You can do Unison 0 and 6, 2 and 4, 4 and 2, or 6 and 0 as far as the different split modes go. So that's a thing. Let's see here. Let's see. How do I fucking turn that off? It's been a while since I was messing with this. We did it on the last stream, but I don't remember how to do it now. There we go. And we can go and find the Unison. I thought the Unison was over here. Keyboard link upper, link Unison, link lower, sequencer. It's around here somewhere, guys. I apologize. It's always fun to remember where things are on synths. I have the fucking manual over there if I have to go find it. This synth does have Unison. Can someone go watch my other video where I go over this like less than a month ago? What I'm looking for is there's a bunch of like little things above and below here that allow you to see what it is you're doing. Vibrato, detune. If I can't find it soon, we'll just move on. But that would be a shame. It would be fun to get this figured out. Aquatic Borealis says the Akai velocity seems high, doesn't it? Yeah, so one thing about the Akai is it has no velocity and the Polaris does. I will say this though, and we talked about this on the Polaris stream, where the Polaris's velocity is so extreme as to almost be unuseful, and in the same way that you have no control over how much velocity goes into it. If I turn the velocity on for both of these, it's very dynamic to where when you're playing, it's like, it could be way too much. like really jump in your face. So it's kind of an interesting thing about, again, just, you know, comparing the differences of these two synths. Someone wants to Google where the fucking Unison feature is here, because I actually did it on the last stream, but oh well. We'll have to compare that some other time. So yeah. Aquatic says, I don't know how you remember how to use all the synths you have. It's definitely a thing. Devastation says, I really think the auto-tune button on the X60 will help with the key tracking of the filter. I did auto-tune it, actually, earlier, Dub. Just to, before the stream, and then during the stream, we did it. But we could do it real quick just to prove it. So if I bring the resonance up and turn the oscillator off. Yeah, you can hear that it's still out of tune. Which is a shame, but that just, you know, that's the nature of the beast, right? So let's see. Big Grime, how's it going? Welcome to the stream, my friend. Had the Akai AX60, had button issues, but sounded great. Yeah, I'd love to have an Akai AX60. My boy John at Edtone Studios has one. We've been talking about trying to get him on the stream for forever to kind of shoot these two out. A lot of people prefer the AX60. I forget how to pronounce the guy's name, but the guy who invented the first synthesizer in Japan actually designed the AX80. And that came out the year before this. That came out in 1985. This one was 86. And it's a super cool synth. Digitally controlled oscillators, analog oscillators, as opposed to voltage controlled, but you have 2 per voice, so it kind of puts it more in that Polaris range. So there's definitely something. Autumn, have a wonderful night. I love you. Take care, okay? Yes, so let's see what else is going on here in the chat. Yeah, so if I can remember how to get Unison on, we'll come back and check that out. Pliskin, sorry about that. It escapes me, but that's, you know, because I don't really, with polysynths, I don't use Unison that often. I'd rather go to the monosynths and do that type of thing, I guess. But one thing to be said was on the AX60, it was super fast to see Unison right here. The fact that I can't find Unison on here immediately is frustrating, right? Like, so even if, don't get me wrong, like I should know where it is. I'm not trying to make excuses, but just from the design perspective, if I can't figure it out quickly, like, what the fuck is that? It has to be one of these buttons. And, you know, we'll come back to that maybe at the end of the stream if you guys remind me. So let's talk about the LFO for a bit. So right now, let's just get ourselves back. Whoa, I don't want to erase anything. That wasn't what I wanted to do. Let's turn that back on and... There we go. So we're kind of back into the neighborhood. Let's just add a little release to both of these guys. So you can see how much of a difference the velocity makes on this synth. All right, we're in the neighborhood. So now we can talk about the LFO. So it's called sweep over here, and we've only got 2 options on the Polaris. We've got sine and a square, and kind of by default, it's only routed to oscillator pulse width. If we want to assign it to something else, like say vibrato, we actually have to assign it over here in, and we can set different amounts, and they can be set to positive or negative amounts. So we can have one oscillator go up while the other goes down, which is cool. I don't really know why I would do that often, but it's a thing. We also have a delay on the LFO. So why don't we assign it to the filter though? I think that would be more interesting. So the way to do that is we have the sweep depth on the filter. So let's just bring the filter down and bring some resonance up. So we have like a nice sort of talky filter, and then we'll increase the sweep depth. You'll notice that it's polyphonic, right? Each voice is doing its own thing. Let's check it out over on the AX60. So similar idea. Whoa, things are being weird. Let's go over here and turn all of this shit down. That seems to be about right. Now we're going to route the LFO select to the voltage controlled oscillator, increase the depth, and see what we get. Wow, so immediate craziness, right? And again, that's kind of the thing about the AX60 is you get these like really extreme values. Let's see how that sounds. So immediately, kind of this interesting difference again, where the LFO behaves pretty normally on the AX60, but on the Polaris, we get this weird, if we just wanted it to open and close the filter, the same on both voice, I'm not aware there's any good way to do that, which is kind of interesting. We could try auto-tuning it all again, so why don't we do that? Lower function, tune all. We're going to wait a second while that's blinking, it's tuning, so we'll just see if it tunes the oscillators and if they'll be in phase, but it sounds like the LFOs are per voice or whatever, so you're getting these differences, which is crazy. Bliskid says, no problem, I feel your pain, I'm still working my way around all of my synths. I appreciate your patience with me, you guys. That is the thing about doing these live as opposed to shooting a video where it's easy enough for me to go open up the manual, hang around for a bit, sip some tea, shoot a couple of shots of mezcal, and then come back and shoot the part of the video where I explain how Unison works. When we do it live, you know, we sort of get into it. Let's see if the phase is fixed. It's not. It's actually almost opposite, which is super interesting. So it does sound good though, doesn't it? Whoa, they were in phase. They were in phase for a second. That was super cool. Anyways, we could also move that over to a square wave, and we could do the same thing over here just by selecting this. So let's hear the difference. So we can match them pretty quick, pretty close, right? Pretty similar there. Now the issue is that's pretty much it with the Polaris's LFO. We actually can apply, like I said, when it's applied to the oscillator tune, right? So I can turn that off real quick just to demo it. I don't really like this sound, but we could apply it to the oscillator 1 vibrato. Right, we could do that, and we could even add a delay, but that's only to the, you can only delay the LFO if it's going to vibrato, right? Whereas over here, on the AX60, we have a delay on all of them. So if we want to just start with maybe a more useful sound, we'll go for something. No way to do that on the Polaris. So this is one of those areas where I'm like, wow, the AX60 is starting to look real good again. When it comes to the LFO section, that's a big feature. The fact that we also have a few more options as far as LFO shape. So instead of just triangle and square, we also have my favorite, which is the sawtooth shape. So we'll turn the delay off. Really fun, of course, like it creates a pluck type sound. We could turn the rate down and go to a reverse shape. So So that's awesome too, right? And we also have a random waveform. So this is when shit gets fun, and a little bit of resonance is okay. I just wish I could dial that resonance in a little bit less crazy. I could use that sample and hold type sound all day long. So the fact that we have a sample and hold shape as well on the AX60, this is all stuff that's missing on the Polaris. So up to this point, I would summarize some of my feelings about the differences between these two synths as to say that the Polaris is missing a lot that's on the AX60. However, it almost always makes up for it with charisma. Like, it just sounds so good. The filter sounds so good. The oscillators and the pulse width modulation sound so good. The fact that the key tracking is perfect on the Polaris and it's not on the AX60 sucks. So it's like this interesting thing where like I said, the charisma of the Polaris sort of pushes through. It's got pretty privilege, you know? Do you guys know any of those people? I'm thinking of this one person. I'm not going to say her name. Emily. Who's really attractive, and she's just gotten through life, you know, and like I'm just kidding, I shouldn't be mean to her. I love Emily. If she was here right now, I'd be saying it to her too. You guys know Emily from some of the streams we've had on, but she's got pretty fucking privilege. That bitch is spoiled because she knows she could get away with shit that other people can't. Right? And that's sort of what the Polaris has. I'm not talking about the prettiness of the synth design. I think they're both gorgeous in their own way. But the sound is so pretty on the Polaris that some of the stuff that you're missing on it, you just sort of go, I don't really fucking care. You know? It's good. So, yeah, that's what's up. Siren says, the beep noises the synth is making sound so good, like an alien computer setup. Yeah, it's a lot of fun to create some of these real kind of retro sci-fi type sounds. So now let's talk about something that the AX60 can do that the Polaris cannot, that I think puts it into its own range. And that's using the VCO mod amount. And this is what Dubstation Zero was saying is possible to do on the 6-track as well, the sequential 6-track, which you can get those sometimes for less than $1,000. So that might be the superior synth of the two because it doesn't have some of the problems. But let's go ahead and pull up a sound and see where we're at. So what we need is plenty of... Is my gate inverted? Now, I know that this synth doesn't sound quite as throaty, you know. Whoa, right. Okay, let's turn that all the way off. Very close. Again, we're in that territory where I would say, okay, you know, if this was a Behringer clone, like let's say it looked like the Polaris or whatever, I would be like, it's in the ballpark. Like Behringer did a good job on this one, you know. So yeah, Zap, welcome to the stream. How's it going? Yeah, missed an hour. Good old missed an hour. Nice thing about YouTube is it's going to be up. So if this is a stream that you find cool, go ahead and check out the rest of it later. Anonymous, this has been a sick comparison so far. They certainly have adverse pros and cons, and it makes it tough to pick which one I'd opt for. Loving the low end of the Polaris for sure, yes. Jim is team Polaris hands down. Yo, we got the Romex King up in the stream. How's it going, Chad? What's up, my brother? Miss you, my friend. We got to get lunch sometime soon. You're like over there, right? Like you're over on H Street, right? I was talking to Justin about that. We got to hang out, man. Let's get coffee. I fucking love coffee. Or like shitloads of alcohol, whatever you want to do. Anyways, what's interesting about the AX60 is we have this VCO mod, and this is where the synth just opens up and does something that's like so crazy. I'm glad to hear you're doing well, Zap. I am marvelous. Thank you for asking. Blessed and highly favored. Yo, good old H Street. So VCO mod, what it does is it's filter FM from the voltage controlled oscillator. So it's probably better if I just show you what it sounds like. Hear how it's taken on that different character? Right? Now, on its own, versus if I do something similar, you know. You sort of hear a difference versus. It's adding a little bit of harmonics to it, but as we increase the resonance, it just goes. One of the things I noticed is I like moving these sliders in unison, so. You want to hear sci-fi sounds? Wow. Down low. Wow, what a sound. It's interesting how it is almost like a dynamic LFO sound. Dark. right? And now we're just in a territory that we're creating these sorts of sounds that we just wouldn't be able to do on the Polaris at all. Let's add, let's swap over to the triangle as well. Let's try it with just triangle because FM's good with triangle, right? So using it this way, we can sort of create interesting harmonics that we wouldn't be able to hear with a normal triangle wave. Gorgeousness. And this is why the question earlier about Poly 6 versus AX60, it's hard for me because to me, these types of sounds are so special and so unique that really just something else to them, right? You know, that has a different sort of timbre. Siren says that synth sounds almost underwater. Yeah, for sure. John from Edgestone Studios, how's it going, my friend? It's weird how the AX60 sounds like the AX80. There's a slight recognizable timbre. Weird how little the AX60 sounds like the AX80. Yes, that is weird, but also not entirely surprising because the AX80 was designed by a completely different person. I forget how to pronounce his name, but a Japanese designer who worked for Hillman and I want to say it was Firstman and or Hillwood, Firstman, Multivox, and then he went on to AX80 at Akai, and it's sort of a very special synth for that reason. Glad to hear you're doing well, John. So yeah, there's just something so and of course things can go like real fucking bizarre. I think the trick is that resonance jumps so aggressively. You want to get it like, you want resonance because without resonance you don't really get a whole lot. You just get more harmonics, which doesn't sound bad. It kind of has this nice sort of, to me that has almost like a bowed guitar type sound. Let's see if we take the depth level further. Wow, that's interesting. Let's try that without VCO mod. It's like kind of whatever, but you put VCO mod in it, it just becomes gorgeous. Yeah, but it's when we add that resonance, but we don't take it too far. Let's try it with the saw and the triangle wave. Let's add a little bit of delayed vibrato, or not vibrato, but modulation to the filter. That way it doesn't just get, it gets really static when you hold a note. So like, now it's just static. So what I want to do is add just a very subtle amount here. I don't want too much, just to break it up a little. Increase the depth level a bit. no fucking chorus on. We've been talking about no chorus this stream, but you know, just to keep it fair between the two. But once you start, I mean, we're at the point of the stream where I think it is fair to involve the chorus, because the thing is that now we're kind of talking about, okay, how do all the puzzle pieces fit together, right? And here's where I think, yeah, having this analog chorus in here to warm up that otherwise kind of brittle cold sound and being able to take it to... Now, without VCO mod, I'm sure it'd still be a good sound. But we're just getting that like kind of brutal resonance, that ice picky resonance, but with the VCO mod on, and it like cleans up the sound so much. That is so cool. And, you know, and without resonance, right, it doesn't work either. Although that is like a real, that is a thick, nasty analog keys sort of sound. To me, with that resonance, it just gets real interesting. Yeah. Now, can the Polaris sound as good as that? And of course the answer is yeah. I mean, it's pretty awesome in its own way, right? So the charisma of that filter is just, it's gonna get you there, right? But they had a little less resonance before. That's without both of these waves, so let's try that again. Let's try it with double pulse width mod on the sawtooths of the Chroma Polaris. The thickness is real. mean, again, it doesn't work. It doesn't work without the VCO mod, right? It's like whatever, but now that VCO mod just like cleans it up. It just makes it immediately a more beautiful sound. I don't know how to describe it. It's such a unique feature to the AX60 and Sequential 6-track. And it's something I wish all synthesizers had. Now, the jumpy faders suck, and I do want to Soundcheck mod this. That way I can, you know, have a finer control over them and get it a little bit tighter. So, I don't know. We've reached the end of the stream, and I would like to know, what do you guys think? Do you think that the Polaris is worth more than double of the AX60? And if you had to own one of the two, I'm curious if anybody, if price wasn't a factor. Again, today I found an AX60 on Reverb for $1,125. And I found a Chroma Polaris. The best price I could find on a working Chroma Polaris was $1,625. So there's, I'm sorry, not $1,600, $2,625. So there's a $1,500 gap between these two synthesizers in price, considering this one only costs $1,125 to start with. You know, I don't know that there's a $1,500 benefit to the Polaris. And I'm curious if anybody in the chat would say they would go Polaris over AX60. I'm not saying I wouldn't, I would myself. A little bit more release, please. Let's see here what everybody's saying. Walter says the Akai needs a doctor appointment. It has some stuff going on. So it is a fully serviced, actually compared to like last time I had it on the stream, this has completely been revamped. All the issues were fixed. This is just what an AX60 is like. The faders aren't 100%, but I mean, god damn does it, I mean, I think it sounds good. I think that synth sound right there is special and harder to achieve. The Polaris sounds amazing. Of course it does. It's a legendary analog polysynth. I don't know. Is it worth more than twice the price? It's interesting. Let's see what else here. Oh, I couldn't find the Unison mode either on the other stream. Oh, I hate myself. Okay, I promise you guys. I promise I will find, and I'll put in the description. I'll look through the manual. I actually bought the manual off eBay. I'll look and see where the Unison mode is and what I was missing there. I mean, unless it doesn't have a Unison mode. I thought it did. Can't imagine it doesn't, but maybe it doesn't. I don't know. So thank you very much, Vulture Mom. Aquatic Boreas says, throw a chorus on the Polaris and it would win. Ricky Magnum, welcome to the stream. Have you installed the Soundcheck mod on the AX60? No, and I want to, because that would fix a lot of the issues. Soundcheck makes really cool mods because largely keeps the essence of the synth the same while fixing some of the problems. So like one of the issues with the AX60, probably the biggest one, is that you have to move a slider 2 values before it registers it, which isn't a bad thing, because if there's dirt or circuit noise in the system, that can cause your sliders to get jumpy, and that's a thing. I don't know if you've ever had that on a synth, but it's super annoying because you're trying to program and like stuff's not well, and that's because there's some noise coming through, and all analog circuitry has noise. So to get around that, they did this 2 value thing. So that's fine, but the problem is that's only for a second. The moment it's over a second, you have to move by 5 to get the fader to register. And that's why you've seen me do a lot of this during the stream, is I'm trying to get the slider to wake up and then let me get that fine-tuned control. And that sucks. And that, like, you're trying to move something a little bit and it's jumping, like, that's a major issue. So Zap says the Akai, but most of the stream. Jim said Polaris. Let's see. Jamie said if price wasn't a factor, I'd choose the Polaris. Siren says Polaris. Jim says the AX60 is kind of fidgety to mess with, way too much work. Dana Oldenburg, how's it going, my friend? Welcome to the stream. Aquatic doesn't like the lack of velocity. Yeah, so I agree, the lack of velocity is an issue on the AX60. Again, my only counter would be that I don't love how the velocity is implemented on the Polaris either. Maybe it's better to have it for certain circumstances, but I leave it off a lot of the time because it's just a little frustrating sometimes. So, Zap says, if one has FM and the other doesn't, it's easy for me. Avanonymous is on the Polaris side, TM. Walter said, design take the Akai, but I do like velocity, so Polaris. Panda says, I agree with Jamie, the Polaris kicks ass. Yeah. Yeah, the Walter says they have dead spots. Yeah, so it's not that they have dead spots. It's the fact that, because I did have them actually all replaced, it's just the nature of the firmware of the AX60, and that's what the Tontec mod is. Essentially, it's a firmware update to the AX60, which enables the synthesizer to just behave in a better way, you know? And so that's a thing that, you know, what are you going to do about it? It's real, but it looks like everybody in the chat, Zap is team Akai AX60, which I think is awesome. But everybody else is on the dark side, the Polaris side. Yeah, I think the Polaris is amazing. I mean, that's why we had it on the stream. My goal for this stream was to highlight that the Akai AX60 is an awesome synth. And they do have this really cool, very similar sound. I mean, we got at points the oscillators to sound almost identical, and then even the filter in the oscillators to sound almost identical. So the fact that they're made from similar components really shows, and they both have that kind of cold timbre. The Akai AX60 was a lot clearer a lot of the time than the Polaris. The Polaris has this sort of like, the high end is shaved off and the low end is rolled off a bit, but it sounds really good. So, you know, it's an interesting thing for sure. Jim says, took my Tonic 6 to a gig last weekend. People had no clue what it was. LOL in the gray suitcase. That's awesome. You got to still gig that out. Holy shit. Can you imagine a Sonic 6, a Moog Sonic 6 at a gig? I'd be terrified to bring any one of these synths with me to a gig. In fact, I think if I was going to gig out with any vintage synths, I'd probably buy a second one just for the gig, right? Like, it would be one of the synths that you could easily replace. Maybe the D50 or the Alpha Juno or something like that, where it's like not the end of the world if a drink got spilled on it or something like that. Aquatic says the Akai is definitely more bang for the buck. Unison mode should be right below the ARP on and off. Yes, so my issue was not finding Unison on the AX60, was finding it on the Polaris. Let me go look here. Where's that fucking manual? Here we go. It's the end of the stream. Let's see if I can look it up in the table of contents here. Does it have a Unison mode? That'd be crazy. I focus so much on like the assignable control. Link Unison 53. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what I'm looking at here. Of course, that's one of the pages that's fucking, you buy it off of eBay, it's all fucked up. Yeah. Okay, I don't think that's it exactly. Let me go back. Appreciate you guys working with me here. I'm beginning to think there's no Unison mode, guys. Okay. Let's take a second here. Let's Google. I'm just curious now at this point. Let's see. I don't know. Let's see here. I'm very interested in that. Let's see. Noise is... I'm waiting for the Arturia plugin version. Yeah, isn't... What is it, Arturia or Cherry Audio's coming out with the Polaris? Jim said, I used it for 4 songs, Gary Newman tunes. That's awesome. I've got a Gary Newman question coming up in the quizzes for the week. That's the thing I do, by the way. If you guys aren't... if you didn't like and subscribe to the video and everything, or become a member of the channel, community section has a lot of quizzes. Every Thursday through Sunday, I do synth trivia quizzes. And we've gotten like 180 people responding to them. So they've been going really good. So I try to keep them interesting. I've got one for Gary Newman next week. Let's see here. Hey, Jamie, you guys have a great night, okay? Avanonymous and Channel 1 Panda, you guys have a great evening, okay? Let's see here. According to Google, no Unison on the Polaris. Okay. Yeah, page 52 is Unison linking for the Polaris. Yeah, but that's not Unison, right? That's how to link to programs, I believe. So that's crazy. Okay, but at least I don't feel stupid. Yeah. Oh, you got to meet Gary Newman in St. Louis? That's awesome. Yeah. All synths deserve a night out, Walter said. That's so fucking true. I should at least take each synth out once on a gig. Maybe that's what I'll do. I appreciate you saying that. So, you guys have a great night, okay? Thank you for being amazing. But crazy. Yeah. Fucking no Unison mode. No wonder I couldn't find it. I took way more time to discover that there was no Unison or anything like that on the JX3P either. It didn't occur to me that they would make a synth that was always polyphonic. It has no mono mode, no Unison mode, nothing. So yeah, let's see. Quick question: Roland SV50, yay or nay? Is the S50, is that the sampler from the 80s? Our local synth group hosts a synth petting zoo. Oh my god, that's amazing. Oh, that's so cute. Adorable. I love that so much. 12-bit 7.2 SE sampler. So I don't have any direct experience with it, and samplers are not my expertise either. So, I don't want to steer you the wrong way on that. However, I have considered it. Is that the one that has the computer interface? Like you have to get the computer too or something like that? That might be more of an issue, right? There's no way to get stuff onto it. If you can do a GoTech mod and add, you know, a floppy to it or a floppy drive, or I'm sorry, a USB floppy emulator, that might be a way around that. Here's what I'll say. I had a Roland U20, which was released at a very similar time, which is the Rompler, not the sampler. But I did not love the sounds that were in it. I thought it was good, but the problem was the Korg DSS-1 and the Ensoniq Mirage kind of beat it out, and the Proteus kind of beat it out. Like, I'm mostly into synthesizers, so it's harder for me to hold on to something like that. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't be an amazing synth. Like, that's kind of the purpose of doing a stream like this. I'd like to ask you guys this question too, before everybody leaves for the evening. Would you guys like to do more versus videos in streams? Would this be the type of format you'd like to see? Because I can just go back to doing other stuff. You know, like, hey, let's look at this or that or the other thing. But I thought it would be interesting to actually compare two synthesizers, because a lot of the times a synth can be amazing on its own, and it's only once you put it up against something else. Like, I was going into my bias in this stream was I thought I would be team AX60 at the end of the stream. And then just the raw charisma of the Polaris kind of won me over, like a lot of the people in the chat. I still think the AX60 is a really special, unique, gorgeous synthesizer. On its own, like, you can get the job fucking done with it, for sure. But there was a little bit of some sort of magic in the oscillators and filter of the Polaris that I could see. I'm like, well, that's there. Hard to argue with that, you know. So I don't know. Let's see here. Edgetone Studio says, sure, Versus are cool. That's awesome. Let's see. Walter says it has a monitor output and a mouse drawpad input. Oh, so it's actually a, it's actually got that. Yeah, so that is cool. So if you don't need a computer, then that's pretty sweet, actually. Regal says, how about deep dive on the SY99 like what you did with the D50? I want to do that. I challenged Dubstation to do it before I do, though. The thing is that's a very deep synth. Deeper than the D50, and the D50 was a massive time sink for me. And don't get me wrong, like, I'm actually shocked at how much people have responded to that D50 video, and I'm very happy I did it. I did that because there was no real good resource on YouTube for learning. That's not entirely true. There is a guy, Dubstation, I think there's a couple of them that have done tutorials on the 77, and so they're basically the same. You could apply the same principles. So in the meantime, while I'm working on that video, Regal, I will do my best to get there, but there are some resources on YouTube right now to help you learn. Aquatic Borealis asks, are there any binaural vintage synthesizers? And yes, there is, and it's right there. And that's all I'm going to say about that for now. I know a couple of people have noticed that, and we're going to get there. That's coming. We will have a live stream on that, but I've been working on a big video for that one in the meantime. Walter says, I don't like the Versus connotation, but I love comparison videos. Yeah, maybe that's what I should say, is more comparison videos. Especially because so much was competing for the same tier with the same chipset. That's a better way to say it. You know, I don't mind it saying Versus on the thumbnail, for instance, just because it's like that conveys the idea quickly to someone. But you know, for me, it's not about which synth is better, because they're both amazing. It's a fair question to ask. If you had to spend your money, which way would you spend your money? I'm not going to ever shy away from asking that type of question, or which one do you like the sound better of. But hopefully the spirit of this video too was very much to celebrate both of these synthesizers, because they were really incredible. Walter says the SY99 is a 6-hour video. Yeah, at least it would be a lot, and I intend to do it. I actually have thought about doing a video on the SQ80 here, maybe first, because it would be easier to get through. Jim, you have a great night, okay? Take care, brother. Zap says, Versus with two totally different sounding synths, not trying to match sounds like a slapping contest. That would be interesting, but for me it would be more difficult. So, for instance, looking behind me, we've got the JD800 and Korg Poly 6 here. Two incredible synthesizers. It would be very hard for me to sort of compare them in any meaningful way, though, because they're so different. Nothing analog about the JD800. Nothing that can go anywhere near the synthesis capacity of the JD800 in the Poly 6. So, you know, I think that's why, for me, and for a lot of people, it's easier to compare things that are similar. Although, you know, you try not to get into that thing where you're like you said, like, not a slapping contest, because what the AX60 could do, the Polaris could not, and vice versa. You know, there was these interesting areas where one would shine and the other one wouldn't, and sometimes you want something. I definitely think the AX60 is so unique sounding, so beautiful in its own way, because it's special. Whereas the Polaris, the thing about it is, I think putting it up against other 2 VCO synths might not do as well. I played a Jupiter 6, and in that case, I thought, ooh, the Jupiter 6 sounds very similar to the Polaris. But there are other 2 VCO analog synths that I think could stack up against the Polaris quite well. But anyways, that's what I'm thinking about with all that. So, with all of that being said, real quick, I just want to shout out all of the members on this channel. It's the best way to support the channel is actually just to join. There should be a little join button below the video, and I just want to shout out everybody who's in the channel. And I'm just going to go by, let's see here, by the total time. So shout outs to Anna, Autumn, Nikki, Dub Station Zero, Andy Fields, Vulture Mom, and Aquatic Borealis for having those incredible gold Vulture skulls by our names. You guys are my heroes. Thank you so much. Jim, Tony, Argo, Douglas, Edge, thank you guys for being silver tier members, meaning you guys have been here for a bit and you are a real Scum family. I appreciate that. And our newest members, welcome to the Scum family, Daniel and Jay Booth. You guys are phenomenal. With that all being said, I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Make some awesome fucking music this week. Have a wonderful time. Love and light, bitches. I am out.